Good evening. We'll get ourselves started as more people will be joining as they come into the screen. Good evening. I'm Irene Etkin Goldman, Board Chair of the Coalition for Peace Action. Welcome. We're all looking forward to hearing from our distinguished speakers this evening, Representative Ro Khanna and Daniel Ellsberg. Over 40 years ago, the Coalition for Peace Action was born as the Coalition for Nuclear Disarmament in response to the ongoing threat of nuclear war. And soon after, in 1981, this volunteer-led organization formalized, hired their first executive director, and convened their first membership gathering. Today, we're excited to welcome you as we join together in celebration of our 40th membership gathering, ably led for 40 years by our very own and inspiring the Reverend Bob Moore. Bob? You're mute.
Yep, thank you, Irene, and it's great to have you all joining us. I just wanted to kind of give you a short overview of how the evening is planned tonight before we ask Ed Aguilar to introduce our keynote speaker, Representative Ro Khanna. Representative Khanna actually has some various conflicts, so may be able to spend just a half hour with us. He had been planning on 45 minutes, but you know, the life of a congressperson can be a little crazy sometimes. Representative Khanna's legislative director is with us tonight, and so she will stay with us through the Q&A, Kate Gould. So we're very pleased with that. Then we will have a presentation by the Reverend Carol Haig about a fundraising opportunity tonight. We have $2,500 of matching grant that has been pledged, and we'd like to invite you to help us meet that challenge. So Reverend Carol Haig will tell you about that. And then I will present our honor to Dr. Daniel Ellsberg. I'm really looking forward to that and humbled to be able to present this award from somebody to somebody who was such an amazing leader over many, many decades on peace and justice and the abolition of nuclear weapons. And we are expecting to, we also, as each speaker speaks, you can put in the chat box your questions for that person as they go along. And Nikki Van Aller, our very able assistant director, will present those questions at the appropriate time. So their final thing is we are recording tonight. So if either you know people who couldn't get on or who would have liked to be on but had a conflict, please do let them know to look on our website under recent events on the right-hand tab, and they will be able to see a recording of tonight's event. So Ed Aguilar, is he on, Nikki?
I'm right here.
You are. Ed, please introduce our keynote speaker.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Aguilar, the Pennsylvania Director for the Peace Coalition. And I have to say it is a distinct honor and pleasure to welcome Congressman Ro Khanna of California's 17th District in the Silicon Valley.
Let me assume it says.
One reason
They will, just wait.
it's such an honor is that Ro Khanna is actually a fellow Philadelphian, as I am. Just as his parents came from a faraway land, as a matter of fact, so did mine to find opportunity in the city of brotherly love. Ro's parents came from Punjab, the Indian state where his grandfather was a leader in the independence movement against the British Empire, which of course ultimately won. His father was a chemical engineer, and Ro attended high school in Bucks County at Council Rock High, and his mother taught school. You'll see a lot more about his career online if you go to peacecoalition.org. Because of time constraints, I'm going to cut this quite short and only skip ahead to his congressional career. In Congress since 2017, Ro Khanna has been a great leader for peace, democracy, and social justice. A great example of his pro-peace leadership came in his very first year in Congress. He won a House resolution condemning US support, the Trump administration's support of the Saudis in the war on Yemen. He won that vote 362 to 30, totally bipartisanly. And Ro Khanna has fought against that genocidal conflict ever since, and he's even called it unconstitutional and given good reasons why, if you go on his website. Ro Khanna is also, I would say, not bipartisan, but nonpartisan. He's had co-sponsors from Bernie Sanders to Rand Paul to Beto O'Rourke and many others on his bills and resolutions. And he sits on the House Armed Services Committee, a key committee, Agriculture, Oversight and Reform, where he chairs the subcommittee on the environment, another key committee on the climate change front. He's the deputy whip of the Progressive Caucus, the assistant whip of the Democratic Caucus, and he's vice chair of the caucus on India and Indian Americans, which makes me wonder how he has time to sleep. In any case, Ro's hard work will pay off for peace and democracy. So please join me in a warm welcome to Representative Ro Khanna of California. Thank you.
Representative Khanna, we're honored to have you and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Reverend Moore. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm interested that we have such a commonality with Philadelphia and as children of immigrants. I look forward to getting better acquainted in the years ahead. And I appreciate your leadership, Reverend Moore. Thank you for your leadership and inviting me. Kate Gold has been instrumental in all of our efforts. So I appreciate her leadership as my legislative director and foreign policy advisor, and glad she'll be on. And I'm glad you're going to be honoring Daniel Ellsberg. He had sent me a note about his recent work, and of course has dedicated his life to issues of human rights and free access of information. I thought I would focus on two issues today: the issue of ICBM modernization in Yemen. We had a hearing today, actually, in the Armed Services Committee, where I pushed some of the military leaders for some basic answers and questions to basic answers to basic questions. They were unable to tell me why is it that we have a estimate that we would need 400 ICBMs in the year 2075. I mean, who knows what life is going to be like in 2075? This assumption that all of the cost estimates are based on having 400 ICBMs made very little sense to me. That there was no good reason for why that number was picked. They were unable to answer why we couldn't just extend the current Minuteman III. Why did we have to have a whole new set of nuclear weapons? Unable to say why we would want to go through digital technology nuclear weapons, given all of the cyber attacks that we faced, and how that would make us any safer. Unable to answer why we need that new technology when we already have such a strong submarine and Air Force capability, and where by their own admission, those capabilities were less susceptible to attack. So there are a lot of unanswered questions. Of course, Senator Markey and I have said that we oppose the modernization, but in a positive development, John Garamendi, who was many years on the committee, I think soon we'll be having a bill that will also oppose the funding for modernization. I think we have a real opportunity to organize around that bill and to make clear to the President Biden, that this is an opportunity with the nuclear review for him to chart a new course and not to pour more money into a program that A, is not necessary to enhance our security, B, risks escalating the arms race, C, is not in the goal of which we've been hoping for 100 years, which is ultimately the end of nuclear weapons, and that we have to have a vision and boldness. The last time really was Gorbachev and Reagan that tried to end and made some commitment and progress on intermediate range weapons. But, I mean, Reagan was it may have been Gorbachev's idea, but Reagan was a partner. And after his assassination, really did not want to see the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So we've departed from that aspiration. We have to at least get to that framework where we want to move to a world without nuclear weapons, and building modernization for nuclear weapons at a time where we don't need it and where the costs are unjustified is just not something I think most Americans would support. I think they'd rather us invest that money in climate change, in tackling pandemics, and investing in our education and health. So I look forward to working with all of you to mobilizing a review on our nuclear policy, and hopefully the administration puts a stop to preemptively committing to building modern nuclear ICBMs all the way up through 2075, when many of us may not be here. I mean, we don't want our legacy to be more nuclear advanced weapons for our children. The second part is, of course, is Yemen, where with all of you have been so active, so engaged. We had heard speculation on Twitterverse that there was a good news and that the Saudis were opening up the Sana'a airport, and I had been in touch with some of the senior leaders who were saying maybe they're going to finally lift the blockade. We're still monitoring that situation. I mean, obviously, if they lift the blockade, that would be tremendous, and if they finally allow food and oil and critical supplies to get to Yemen. And I do hear that the airport at least is being open, but the critical point is the blockade. And can we open up the ports? Can we open up the place for our fuel and for economic activity? And we will monitor it the next few days to see if some of these rumors turn out to be correct. I mean, Saudis have lost the war, and the sooner they recognize that, the better chance we will have of peace and in some kind of power sharing agreement in Yemen. So I wonder if they have finally recognized that. But if they haven't, Senator Sanders and I are prepared to act, and all of the options are on the table, from a defense authorization bill that would restrict us supplying the Saudis with the parts that basically allow the Air Force to operate. I mean, we could literally ground their Air Force. That's the truth, and we can get that through the NDAA. We always have the War Powers Resolution as a tool. If we really think that the negotiations and the administration pressure has ground to a halt. So we have been working with the White House and upping the pressure. We're told Leonard King is really making it clear to the Saudis they need to lift the blockade. They need to start to wind down this war. And we've been in no uncertain terms said that, and have been assured at the highest levels, from Jake Sullivan to the secretary, that this is going to happen, and that this is the policy of the administration, and they understand that hundreds of thousands of people have died, and this is a humanitarian crisis. So let's see what happens in the next few days. Let's see what happens in the next 10 days. But we are not we're not neglecting the situation. We're prepared to act. Kate has been working on the defense amendments that are ready to go. We made it clear to the administration that we will not support further defense aid cooperation in terms of supplying of any of our parts to the Saudis if they don't lift the blockade. So they understand that that's going to pass the NDAA. I don't think the president will threaten to veto that. So the Saudis know that there is a key deadline coming up with the National Defense Authorization, and we will use that if they don't take every step to remove the blockade, allow things in there, the fuel, the key parts, have a new UN resolution that doesn't allow the Saudis to continue this blockade. And our hope is to do that by this summer, as July 1st is when the NDAA will be considered. So those have been the two primary focus areas. I'm happy to take questions on anything that's on your mind. I want to just thank Peace Action for your activism, your vision, your passion, your engagement. It's making a difference. It certainly made a huge difference on Yemen. I think it can make a difference on the nuclear weapons issue if we get engaged and get a broad coalition. And I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I know Kate does as well.
Thank you so much, Representative Khanna. Yes, let's show our appreciation. I consider you to be the top peace legislator in the U.S. Congress, by the way.
There are a lot of
Your leadership has been truly outstanding, and you're passionate, but you're also very smart, and that was clear in your remarks about how to use the NDAA and other mechanisms that are available to kind of get our agenda, our peace agenda, to move forward. So we are so appreciative. And Nikki, do you have any questions accumulated yet? If not, I'm certainly glad to get the ball rolling with a question, but Nikki?
I do have a few, but keep sending them in the chat box and I'll try to keep up with them. The first question that came in is asking for your thoughts about the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and what kind of impact that could have, and if you see that re-energizing jihadist movements, what kind of outcome you think will come out of that?
Well, I give the president a lot of courage, credit for his courage. I think he overruled his generals. It's no question that the Petraeuses of the world and some of the existing generals wanted him to stay, and it would have been an indefinite presence. And he was opposed to that escalation in the Obama administration, and he stuck to his guns. And he said, well, what are we going to do there with $50 billion a year, with more casualties? People talk about women and children, and it's absolutely true that we have to stand up for women and children rights in any agreement. But what they are failing to take account is the voice of many women leaders in Afghanistan and the casualties that are happening of women and children because of the ongoing war and the ongoing conflict. It's many civilians are being killed. So I think withdrawal is the right decision. The United States has retained the ability to go back if they're in strikes or other things, if there's ever a haven of terrorism that develops that actually threatens the United States. And the Taliban should be under no illusion that that would happen if they started to harbor terrorism again. I don't think they will do that. Secretary Blinken is going to have a Herculean task of trying to negotiate something that honors some of the women's rights and honors the young girls in particular who are vulnerable. I mean, we have to be clear-eyed about that there is a lot of sexism in there, and that there's violence, and we have to do our best in terms of standing up for human rights in this negotiation process and putting all of the diplomatic pressure and incentives that we can on the Taliban to have some basic decency. So but I think I have quite a lot of confidence that the president's team has taken a thoughtful approach there.
Nikki, do we have another question?
Yeah, sure. This question is asking what you think the US response should be to Russia and China further developing their nuclear capabilities.
Well, we ought to have an arms control negotiation and diplomacy. I'm heartened that the president has done that with Russia. I think he's rejecting this idea that we have some Cold War, relitigated Cold War. He's willing to negotiate with and have diplomacy with Putin. We need to do the same thing with China. I mean, Xi Jinping, we have to sit down. We have to look where we can find some common ground while we have strong disagreement, and work towards a framework like the START agreement, work towards another framework of nuclear arms control and making sure we don't have a race. And to the extent the United States takes good action on the ICBMs, that can help us in facilitating that kind of an agreement.
Thank you. These are jumping around, but
Okay.
I have a few on peace with Iran. Yeah, the general topic is coming up a lot.
I have tremendous faith in Ron Malley. I think that the administration has done a great job in appointing him. They didn't put him on the playing field for a while. That is a real challenge that he was handcuffed, and I think we got off to too late a start, and now you have the Iranian elections coming up. But I think we ought to re-enter the agreement, and we ought to lift some of the sanctions. We can always snap them back on, but we were the ones who came out of it. We have an obligation to make the first move to get back in. And people say, well, what if they start developing the weapons? Well, they were developing, they've increased their weapons 25 times since Trump took office in the maximum pressure campaign. They're much closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before the maximum pressure campaign. The only thing the maximum pressure campaign hurts is our interest in not having them have a nuclear weapon. They're perfectly fine with the status quo. So it is in our interest to get in, and that's Malley's view, and that's been my view in Congress.
Nikki, any more?
There's plenty. I can keep them coming.
Go ahead then.
What are your thoughts about trying to close some of the many U.S. military bases around the world?
I think it makes sense to review those bases. I don't think we need, my understanding is almost 800 bases around the world, a footprint of well over 100,000 troops in over 80 countries. So that seems excessive given our security needs. We don't need that kind of a presence. It's costly. It's one of the reasons we have a $740 billion budget, and it can be unnecessarily provocative. And we're not a colonial nation. We don't have empire as an aspiration. We're a democratic republic. So I am for having a thorough review and looking at how we can have more restraint.
How much?
Go ahead, Nikki.
How much is Congress informed about the dangers of nuclear winter, the climate and food impacts of the use of nuclear weapons?
I think we could be more for it, but I think if people understand the risks, if people understand that it's a horrific scenario about both for food, for climate, for humanity, and that that's why we ought to do everything we can to work towards both nuclear proliferation and arms control. And we have more credibility to do that if we're taking actions on our end to reduce the risk, to reduce the extraordinary arsenal that we have.
Absolutely, yeah. This question is, how will the question of US and the European Union providing enough vaccines and PPE, et cetera, affect our foreign policy, and how do we prevent the next pandemic? Question.
Well, I appreciate that we're now engaging in efforts to help the rest of the world. I think the TRIPS waiver was critical. We've got to have these vaccines distributed and support global manufacturing initiatives. The fact that we're committed to buying vaccines and then distributing them, I think is a wonderful sign of leadership that will really help us show that our commitment to the world. But the ultimate thing is we've got to help build the global manufacturing capacity in parts of the world that don't have it, and really have $25–50 billion of a massive fund to achieve that. Long term, I think we have to increase the NIH budget on antiviral therapeutics, antiviral testing, antiviral vaccines, all of which they've done work on, but it's a $100 million budget compared to the defense budget, which is $734 billion. I'd make that budget 10 times as much. It gets $1 billion. It's still a fraction of the defense budget. And I would frame pandemics and climate change as an expanded definition of national security. The Democrats are the party of national security for the 21st century.
I think that's the gist of most of them. Oh, actually, if you just came in. Do you have any thoughts about the UN treaty to call for the abolition of nuclear weapons that went into force January 22nd this year?
Well, I think as an aspiration, I think that is a good aspiration. I mean, we should be for a world that doesn't have nuclear weapons. Obviously, until a lot of other countries do, we need to have a nuclear deterrent. But the point with the Minutemen and GBSD is that we don't need to modernize and build new expensive weapons to be able to have a deterrent. We have a very strong deterrent with our submarine and Air Force and current existing ICBMs, and we ought to be working to reduce them.
Yes, I wanted to have a question here, Representative Khanna, about
Of course.
the U.S. military budget. And I agree with you. I'm heartened by the Biden administration's leadership and commitment to diplomacy as a primary way of interfacing with other countries around the world. And I think I agree with you too, that there was a little bit of sluggishness in getting things started, both with the Iran nuclear agreement and with getting vaccines shared with the rest of the world, but those seem to be getting on track now. But the one real disappointment I have so far is the size of the U.S. military budget in the Biden administration's budget, first proposed budget. It's an increase again. And I just really have problems with that. One of our priorities, in fact, is a peace economy. So we see a lot of room for that military budget, and especially in the nuclear weapons arena. The nuclear modernization program being a good example, $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years, and that's a conservative estimate. So do you have any comments about that or suggestions of how we in the U.S. peace could have more influence in getting that number to go down instead of up?
Well, I share your disappointment and will not support the budget as a result of that. I think there are clearly areas with the OCO slush fund where we could cut, with nuclear modernization where we could cut, with overseas bases where we could cut. So there are places where our spending is just not actually necessary to keep us safe, and with bloated defense contractors who are overpriced and monopolists in many cases. The challenge has been politics. I mean, there are a number of people in districts that that have heavy defense industrial bases and jobs, and it's a very hard vote for them. And I think there's a unfortunate calculation that we would lose those seats if we are in any way lower the defense numbers, even though Trump took those up. I mean, the Obama numbers were around 600 billion, and we can't even get to Obama levels. So I think that the key is to figure out how we message this in a way that is assuring people that we are keeping them safe, that these are really excesses that we're going after. And then how we have a jobs agenda and economic vision for these districts so that they diversify their economy and that they don't feel that a cut in defense is going to hurt their livelihoods. But I think that is the key, is to get these swing vote members in these districts on board with a agenda that is a smarter defense strategy.
Well, again, we really appreciate your outstanding leadership, Representative Khanna, and we understand that you're going to have to get off very shortly, and we certainly respect that. We commend you. We want to partner with you. We want to support your leadership. And I know Kate, your legislative director, can stay on for a few more minutes after you have to leave, so she may want to add a few comments. In fact,
That'd be great. Well, she's terrific and has been.
Yeah. Kate, do you want to fill in any blanks that you feel Representative Khanna might like to have brought to our attention?
Well, I am happy to also, I'm happy to fill in and happy to take other questions. I know that the congressman does have to get off, but yeah, thank you all so much for this opportunity, and yeah, I can stay on however long you'd need me to. So
okay, well, let's show Representative Khanna some appreciation. That was
thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for all the work. More importantly,
thank you, and God bless you and your great leadership.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you so much.
Kate, so Kate is still with us. Did anybody have a comment or a question they could send through the chat box, or if you're in the leadership group, you can even just unmute yourself. But Ed, do you have anything you'd like Kate to comment on?
Well, I was very interested in what Khanna was saying about how do we, get these districts. The reason the Pentagon is so successful in part is that they put a factory or a defense plant in practically every district in the country. Now, Ro Khanna has written an entire book on bringing back manufacturing to the United States. And it was a prescient book way back in 2013, but it's much more relevant even now. So I wonder if he has, of course, just left, but I wonder, Kate, if you would feel like taking on, how do we diversify? How do we create a situation where we can move defense jobs over to the civilian sector?
Yeah. Great question. And thank you, Ed. Thank you, Reverend Moore. And thank you, everybody. Also, I'm delighted to get to be on. And I was telling before I joined, I was telling Reverend Moore that it's wonderful to have my Coalition for Peace Action and Representative Ro Khanna Worlds collide. Because it's been a long time, but I remember I got to go to your, I don't remember what number was it then. I don't, now it's 40 years in it, but there must have been another, some other big number that I don't know, I don't even remember how many years ago. So great to be back. On your question, Ed, yeah, interesting question. So yeah, the
Sorry for such a big question.
What'd you say?
I'm sorry for such a broad range.
No, yeah, no, it's a good question.
We're going to get defense, the military cut down, I think.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so the congressman does have, I mean, we have a number of different, from our office, a number of different proposals on job creation of just many kinds in climate and infrastructure and education. I mean, that of course, I'm sure you all know that there's so many studies out there that show you pour money into most any other major industry and you get more jobs out of them than you do with defense contractors and such. So there's, I think, if we can get those kinds of big government investments, and of course that is the idea behind just, I mean, a lot of our, the congressman's proposals, but also a lot of the Biden proposals that are being discussed right now. So if there are those kinds of investments, then that can really transform options. But it's those initial investments that have, so for so long that defense has been prioritized. So that they have the unfair advantage, but yeah, so I think, there's, I mean, I don't know all the specifics, but can just say, it seems clear that if you have anything like the kinds of, or anything coming anywhere close to the kinds of investments in defense, then you could create far more jobs.
Can I give you two very quick specifics? One is from Representative Houlihan right here in suburban Philadelphia, which if you haven't seen it, I'll pass it on to you. And she would like to have a 500,000 person employees, right, in a public health corps, okay? So that we fight the next pandemic before it's too late, right? So that we are ready for the next pandemic. And the other, I just heard from the Sunrise Movement people, and they are marching to Washington. So you will see them soon. They're coming from Pennsylvania and many other states. And their proposal is over 1 million jobs for a climate action corps, okay? So I think there's many possibilities and many people with lots of great ideas. So, and I just want to thank you and Ro Khanna again, because you have been leaders in that very thing. And I'll stop monopolizing the time. Thank you.
Yes, and Kate, I think we are going to move on momentarily to the next part of our program, but somebody has asked if you could clarify your role in Representative Khanna's office.
Sure. I am the legislative director and human rights and national security advisor for the congressman. So I advise the congressman on all issues, but supervise the legislative staff, our legislative team, and then and assist with the development of his overall legislative agenda, but specifically manage his priorities on defense and foreign policy issues, and staff him for the House Armed Services Committee.
Great, and thank you, Kate. Thanks to Representative Khanna. Thanks to you for being with us as well. And I think we will move forward with the next step on our program. You're certainly welcome to stay if you have the time, but don't feel any pressure. We're going to be very shortly honoring Dr. Dan Ellsberg, which is something I've been looking forward to for a while. He is so deserving of the award we want to give him shortly, plan to give him shortly. But before that, I'm going to ask Reverend Carol Haig to say a few words about the very special opportunity to support the Coalition for Peace Action financially. Carol. You still have to unmute, Carol.
Okay. I never know if somebody's going to turn me loose or if I have to break my own bonds. Thank you for inviting me to speak, Bob. The Coalition for Peace Action is a unique civic organization. There are groups prepared to protect the earth and all life from global warming. There are groups doing the important work of racial justice, LGBTQ equality, criminal justice reform, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, and many, many more. There is just one organization committed to preventing instant annihilation of planet Earth by nuclear weapons. This threat by hundreds of nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert across the globe hardly even makes the news. Now, as Irene alluded earlier, 40 years ago, in 1880, a group of Princeton area religious organizations held the founding conference and multi-faith service for peace of what was originally known as the Coalition to Reverse the Arms Race. In succeeding years, it has been known as the Coalition for Nuclear Disarmament, and since 1993, the Coalition for Peace Action, when this organization joined with others nationally. The year after its founding, again, Irene gave the clue, a hint to what's coming. A year after its founding, this volunteer group hired a professional director, the Reverend Robert Moore, and Bob Moore celebrates his 40th anniversary as director this September. The Coalition for Peace Action, under his leadership, remains one of the most effective citizen peace groups in the United States. So this is a year of 40s, 40 years plus for the organization, 40 years coming up for Bob Moore's leadership. In this 40th year of the coalition's existence, ending the threat of nuclear weapons is more important now than ever. As Ro Khanna has referred to, we could be spending billions of dollars on nuclear modernization, thus reactivating the arms race that started this organization even existing. And conflicts across the globe could become nuclear, and we know, we'll hear more from Daniel Ellsberg, could have become nuclear at a moment's notice. So all of you who are attending this virtual event, this meeting of the coalition membership, you are here because you believe in the critical importance of this work. And I must say, it is discouraging that we are still faced with the same threat that loomed 40 years ago. However, No movement thrives on discouragement. So let's celebrate 40 years of fabulous work that has surely helped us not use nuclear weapons for all of these 40 years. And let us commit to whatever it takes to put those monsters in the dustbin of history. My husband and I contribute to the coalition annually in 4 different bits, and we would like to add our own special gift with a 40 in it for this year. And this 40, I wish it were 400 or 4,000, but it's 140. And this check will be delivered to, surprisingly, 40 Witherspoon Street. I didn't realize until just tonight that the 40 comes home to roost tonight. But we know that our contribution and all of your contributions will be doubled tonight, up to $2,500. So I encourage us, let's raise not 2,500, let's raise 5,000, and we'll go over a 4,000 goal to celebrate this 40th anniversary. And you can see on your screen various ways that you can contribute. And I invite you to do so now in whatever way makes sense to you. And let's make commit to 40 years in which this monster of nuclear weapons diminishes and maybe even disappears. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the work of this wonderful organization.
Thank you, Reverend Carol Haig. And I think while you're either making an online donation or writing a check, whichever you prefer, Nikki has a video for us to watch.
How do we do that?
Thank you, Nikki, and I hope you feel inspired to support our work in this special way. And I liked your suggestion, Carol, of thinking of a number that is a multiple or has the number 40 in it somehow. That's a nice symbolic gesture. I'm going to be the one presenting our award to Dr. Dan Ellsberg, and After he receives the award, we're going to ask him to make some remarks and hopefully take some questions from you too about his latest whistleblowing, which some of you I'm sure are familiar with if you read the New York Times or other major publications, that he has just done whistleblowing about how close the United States came, how seriously it considered using nuclear weapons against China in the Taiwan crisis in 1958. I am honored and feel very privileged to be presenting tonight's award for Lifetime Achievement in Peacemaking to Dr. Daniel Ellsberg on behalf of the Coalition for Peace Action. Over the past 40 years, CFPA has incorporated honoring peacemakers at each annual membership gathering. Many of them were volunteers who were unsung heroes and labored in the trenches largely unnoticed. I'm glad we've incorporated honoring such rank and file peacemakers, usually about 3 at each annual membership gathering. As a society, we are good at honoring military and war heroes. We're not very good at honoring peacemakers. Tonight, we are excited to honor a world-famous peacemaker who has dedicated most of his adult life to anti-war and anti-nuclear weapons activism. Dan Ellsberg first came to prominence in 1971 when he released the top secret Pentagon Papers that proved what the US government was telling the American people about how well the Vietnam War was going was utterly false. In 1973, Dan was charged under the Espionage Act and faced a possible sentence of 115 years in prison. A highly deserved Olof Palme Award given to Dan Ellsberg in 2018 recognized his, quote, exceptional moral courage, end quote. And that is the first thing that really stands out for me as an extraordinary and exceptional thing about Dan, his moral courage. Untold millions became aware of the US government's massive deception about the Vietnam War because of Dan Ellsberg. As a result, the winding down of that war accelerated, and it finally ended in 1973. My own life trajectory was strongly impacted, and I became passionately involved in the peace movement, starting in the fall of 1968 when I was a freshman in college, and continuing in my peacemaking ministries over the past 51 years. Dan's moral courage inspired me to act with greater courage and take more risks in my peace advocacy. I've also been deeply impressed with Dan's steadfastness and deep commitment in his lifetime of anti-war and anti-nuclear leadership. In 1978, Dan accepted my invitation to speak at the National Conference of Mobilization for Survival in Des Moines, Iowa. I was amazed that he came to the heartland, hardly a mecca of the peace movement, to speak for only travel expenses, no honorarium. Dan's willingness to speak for relatively modest-sized organizations continued to impress me. Soon after the start of the Iraq War, Dan came to speak for one of our earlier Coalition for Peace Action annual membership dinners on a Sunday in Princeton. He stayed an extra day to speak for a luncheon at Princeton's program on science and global security. By the way, Professor Frank von Hippel is on with us, a founder of that program at Princeton. And so I asked Dan if he could speak that morning before he was going to speak at the lunch for the kickoff meeting of a new CFPA chapter in Monroe Township. Now, there's a lot of retirees, some of you know that, in Monroe Township, so no problem for them to get together on a weekday morning. Dan agreed, and the leaders of this new chapter, who were 2 retired school teachers, told me that they just about fell off their chairs when they heard that Dan Ellsberg was willing to come and speak. Dan drew an overflow crowd of 200 and mesmerized all of us. Last August, Dan graciously agreed to speak for CFPA's Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemoration for the 75th anniversary of those bombings. It was a webinar format due to the pandemic. What really impressed and inspired me was the moral clarity of Dan's conscience compared to his fellow nuclear war planners. They were fully prepared, even in the 1960s, to use US nuclear weapons, despite the official Pentagon estimate that 600 million children, women, and men would die. Now remember, the world population at the time that estimate came out was only about 3 billion. As Dan said, those 600 million deaths would be the equivalent of 100 Holocausts. This past February, we co-sponsored a webinar with Massachusetts Peace Action, where Dan discussed his latest book, The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. This is an outstanding, deeply researched book, and I highly recommend it. Dan's continued effort to educate and activate the public about the unimaginable dangers of nuclear war shows his resolve for actions to make as big of an impact as possible in favor of concrete steps toward a world without nuclear weapons. Finally, I want to close this tribute by saying how deeply impressed and inspired I was to recently read in the New York Times that at the age of 90, Dan has again engaged in dramatic and risky whistleblowing by releasing top secret documents about how seriously the US considered using nuclear weapons against China in the 1958 Taiwan crisis, despite those same government leaders that considered it believing that it would likely lead to the Soviet Union using nuclear weapons against the US homeland in retaliation. The Times said that Dan may again face charges that have long jail sentences associated with it. But at 90 years old, Dan Ellsberg's humanitarian and moral commitment to the struggle for global nuclear weapons abolition remains steadfast and totally exemplary. Nikki, please screen share the certificate we will be conveying to Dan for this honor. And after that, we'll ask Dan to give a short talk on this latest courageous act of peacemaking. And you can see on your screen now, the Coalition for Peace Action is pleased to honor Dr. Daniel Ellsberg with an award for Lifetime Achievement in Peacemaking for his outstanding contributions to the pursuit of peace. Nikki, if you could let us all be seen, we'll try to give Dan a little bit of applause. You can't hear it, Dan, but know that we mean it from our hearts. Oh, there's somebody even giving a standing ovation. I know if we were in an auditorium together, you would all be standing. Everyone would be. Carol, thank you for that inspiration. We are giving you a standing ovation, Dan, and you deserve it. You deserve it, brother. You've been magnificent, utterly magnificent with the way you have dedicated your life to peace.
Thank you so much.
You accidentally muted yourself, Dan. Sorry.
I appreciated that introduction more than almost any others that I can remember, because it comes from somebody who's really known me more than half my life. And I was thinking just the other day that unlike other whistleblowers who have paid very heavy price for their truth-telling, like Mordecai Vanunu in Israel, spent 10.5 years in solitary. And of course, right now, Ed Snowden in lifetime exile, Chelsea Manning, 7.5 years, well, a lot of that in solitary confinement. And I didn't have any of that by virtue of a virtually miraculous set of events that could not have been foreseen at all. And I was thinking, I really paid no price at all, except for losing all of my friends on 50 years ago, this June 13th. They all had clearances. I was thinking of this just the other day because they all had clearances, and their spouses were married to people who had clearances. And so virtually very few, I counted actually on my hand, the ones who didn't totally forsake me: Mort Halperin, Bernard Brody, a couple of others, Tom Shelley. And I was struck that someone said earlier, talking about half my life, and it led me, since I have difficulty with arithmetic at this age, to figure out, well, when was half my life? Well, it was 1977, it turns out, and or 76 to be a little more accurate. I was born in 1931, so I'm 40. I added up 45, got to 1976. Well, Robert, I think you were saying that we met in 77. Is that correct? Is that right? I'm asking
1978, when you spoke at the Mobilization for Survival. Yeah.
So now my new life had begun, of course, a few years earlier than that. I copied the Pentagon Papers in '69. I'd been working since '67 to try to end the war from inside. But in '69, I began doing it more effectively, I hoped, from outside, but that didn't come out until 2 more years, 1971. But that does mean that more than half my life, I'm getting this award for my peacemaking activities. You say lifetime, strictly speaking, a little more than half my lifetime. And that's good. And having lost nearly all of my friends, then of course, I made new friends. And I'll tell you, since that was such a personal introduction, we've been together on this road so long, Robert, that particularly when you say it started, came up just yesterday with my son, who was born in '77, actually, just 1977. And he was mentioning, I'd just given him a long lecture or something about something. And I said, was that too long? And he said, no, it's all right, as long as you don't mention Vietnam. So I said, wait a minute, you were born in '77. That's 2 years after the war. How could you have heard? He's allergic to anything about Vietnam. He says, I heard a lot about it, after '77. And then he added, and nuclear. I said, well, look, your first rally, and he got allergic to rallies. I just can't get him to a rally anymore because he'd just been to too many. And I said, look, your first rally was not about Vietnam. It was the inauguration of the Mobilization for Survival on August 6th, Hiroshima Day, 1976, I think that was. No, he was born in '77. He was 3 months old. He was born in May. I said, I held him in my arms at the Mobilization for Survival here. So, Robert, you're one of the few who goes back to that, exactly. And then, of course, there was there was the Freeze campaign. We worked together on the Freeze campaign. And sane freeze. I was on the strategy task force of the freeze campaign, I guess it was, and it became sane freeze. One little footnote on that. I've always asked myself, since that was sane, it was essentially said for a sane nuclear policy. So I've asked myself, what did they think a sane nuclear policy would be? I don't remember their ever spelling that out. Maybe after this you could remind me, somebody, but I'm not sure they ever really laid it out, Dr. Spock and Mark Raskin and so forth. What would a sane nuclear policy? Well, obviously it would be nothing like the US policy in any given year from 1945 on. That's 70 years there. And I was very impressed, Carol, your standing ovation there, but I was very impressed when you used the word discouragement, because I think someone who is not able at times or does not feel discouraged by where we've come is not aware, is not sufficiently aware of the realities of what's been going on to be of much help. They're living in another world if they think there's no reason to be discouraged here. Things could have been worse. We are here after all, and things could have been a lot worse, and I think would have been without the efforts that we've put in. The Vietnam War could have been larger and bigger than it ever was, bad as that was. And we could have used nuclear weapons at various times. As Robert was just saying, I just put out stuff that I've known since a study and first worked on in 1963 about the 1958 Taiwan Straits crisis, which doesn't show that we almost came to nuclear war, because what we now know is that Mao had no intention of going to arms conflict. When he said he was going to take Quemoy and Matsu on the way to Taiwan, he was bluffing. He said that, his people said that, they were bluffing. They were realistic enough not to want any armed conflict with the US, but they were shadowboxing in a very aggressive way, and the US leaders believed it. They thought that they were after Quemoy and Matsu, Quemoy being 1.2 miles from the mainland of China, inside the port of Amoy, essentially. And they were prepared, so they did expect that they were going to face armed conflict. And all of them, actually, nobody thought he's bluffing. Nobody said that, as the study shows. No, he's going to do it, and what are we going to do about it? And they all agreed, everybody agreed, Quemoy and Matsu are of no interest to anybody, not even really the nationalist Chinese. They're rocks just outside mainland China. But by putting a third of his army on Quemoy and Matsu, Chiang not only created a commitment there on his side, but he told his followers in Taiwan and the followers he claimed to have in mainland China that he seriously was planning to recapture mainland China. So these were stepping stones to an invasion of mainland China. And he said, if we lose those, our people agreed, his following in Taiwan, in his tyrannical, torturing dictatorship, at least quite comparable to the tyranny of communist China on the mainland, he would fall if he wasn't going to lead them back to retake mainland China. In other words, if he gave up Quemoy and Matsu, he would lose his following, and our Air Force would lose its bases on Taiwan. And so rather than that, Eisenhower was committed to initiating nuclear war if the Chinese pursued their blockade to a point where we couldn't stop it. With, he was talking here about a blockade of Yemen, and here there was a question of a blockade of Quemoy. And if they used air power, which they had, we couldn't get through that with conventional weapons. So Eisenhower agreed, we will initiate nuclear war. And they didn't do the air power because, as I say, Mao was not interested in that. I mention all that now because, of course, we're about to face exactly the same situation. Do I think that Xi or Xi in China or Biden want armed conflict or want nuclear war? No, no. I doubt if there's anybody in Washington, anybody. We don't have a LeMay or a Lawrence Cooter, let's say, who was head of Pacific Command at that time, who was looking forward to paying back China for becoming communist and with nuclear weapons. But as Dulles said in the top secret information that's still classified that I put out 2 weeks ago, Dulles says in the part they've refused to declassify, nobody wants World War III until you look at the alternatives of letting them win something, you know. And that's what he said. Dulles didn't want World War III, but it was a lesser evil compared to losing Chiang on Taiwan. Now, that could arise again. Who wants World War III or nuclear war, except when Biden looks at being humiliated by the Chinese, by some kind of invasion, which the Chinese, as recklessly as anybody else, conducted amphibious exercises, the kind I used to do in the Marines. I've come ashore in exercises on amphibious landing boats 100 times in the Marines. Well, that's what they were just doing near Taiwan, shadowboxing there essentially. And we're putting warships in the Taiwan Straits again. So again, we're faced again with this question: could it be justified to initiate nuclear war over Taiwan? And of course, that answers itself. Obviously, it's not justified. Who would disagree with that? But what about threatening nuclear war over Taiwan? Is Biden going to give that up? I don't think so. This is not the month or the year that Biden will go for no first use, which many of us have been fighting for 40 years here, because he'll say that I will be charged with inviting the Chinese to invade Taiwan. He said, actually, you know, the critical element, no, but will he be charged with that? Yes. Is he willing to face that charge? No, let me just say no. Maybe yes, maybe he'll fool me wrong in 2 weeks. Maybe he'll announce no first use. Maybe he'll say, we do not propose to initiate nuclear war over Taiwan, but I don't expect that. And as Carol was saying, we look over 40 years, the initial goal of SANE and freeze and peace action and all of these has been to stop the arms race. That's the first one, right? Well, I just looked up minutes ago, I'm sorry, check on this, what the goals were. That one was dropped with the end of the Cold War. That's over, right? Wrong, okay? Wrong, it didn't stop. And I just today read some very good, I won't go on for, that would not surprise people, but I will say, I just read today quite a good statement by they call themselves ACURA, A-C-U-R-A. It has something to do with Russian-American relations, collaboration or something. And they were against the Cold War with Russia, as I am. And they didn't mention China, but I'm sure they would say the same. Anyway, they said we should get Biden to do a number of things with a summit coming up, of course. And we should get Biden and Putin to agree together to what Reagan and Gorbachev stated about 40 years ago, just a little less than 40 years ago. Nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought. And I just sent a letter to them saying, very good statement, except for one thing. That statement is radically inadequate because it doesn't say, first of all, there's the fact. After saying that, which was a good statement as far as it goes, after saying that, both of them continued their buildup of every kind of weapon except intermediate range missiles, which happily they agreed not to do, largely because, you know, we were a major factor in that the freeze campaign and everything in the intermediate range missile treaty that came out of that to answer the freeze sort of. But ICBMs, bombers, sub-launch missiles, accurate missiles in both subs and ICBMs, whose only purpose is to allege to disarm Russia, which they can't do because I think Khanna mentioned, the submarines. No, our ICBMs don't attack their submarines. They can destroy us. They can cause nuclear winter with their subs alone. So the damage limitation idea is absolutely a hoax, just like anti-ballistic missiles against Russia. Fraud, hoax, but a real jobs program and a real profit maker. And so I said, what Reagan and Gorbachev did not say was, they said nuclear war must not be fought. What they did not say was, it must not be threatened, prepared, rehearsed, armed for, that damage limitation cannot occur in a war between nuclear armed states. They neither said that nor acted on it. And by the way, there were two people who actually, I think, might have been willing to do so. They discussed eliminating nuclear weapons in a way, with a sincerity, I think, that no other world leaders have shown before or since. But could they have really gotten it? Could Biden get it now? Well, I thought that Aguilar raised a very good question. And I haven't. How do we move jobs from the defense to civilian activities? Which we didn't get a real answer to, if I may say, right? Good question, good question. How do we do it? If we can't do that, then, Carol, there will, 40 years from now, if we're still here, the arms budget will be as bigger than it is now, because the profits from this in the military industrial complex on both sides. Remember that the profit motive is as big an issue in Russia now as it is here, a capitalist country, and they have their arms makers. And if you can't move that money, you can't make any more change than we've had for the last 40 years. And that's better than blowing the world up, but it preserves the chance of blowing the world up almost any day from a false alarm, and certainly from a crisis like Taiwan. And that's inexcusable, unconscionable, and it just hasn't improved. I was thinking, Mr. Aguilar, I've forgotten your first name, but that an answer possibly to how do we move those people. Moving them to civilian things is very hard, because Reagan taught us 40 years ago that government investment on anything but, quote, defense is bad. Government is the problem. We heard about the need for government investment. No, we've had 40 years of indoctrination that government investment is very bad, except in weapons. Now, so I was thinking, isn't there some weapon we could build for Lockheed that would be less dangerous than the ICBMs? Because I was struck that when Khanna gave reasons, who's very, very good. I mean, he's terrific. And he and AOC, and Squad and the other Progressive Caucus, very good. I did notice that when he argued against the ICBM, or the ground-based strategic deterrent, as so-called, he mentioned wasteful, unnecessary, and so forth. It's not eliminating nuclear weapons. He didn't mention they're dangerous. And he knows they're dangerous. Khanna knows that. And whether Biden does or not, I actually don't know. But the fact is, there you've got a weapon system that is the vulnerable first strike trigger to the doomsday machine. And if you could get rid of those, you would have made the world less dangerous, though still dangerous, but less dangerous. So, okay, this is half in joke, but only half. I thought, what's a weapon now that isn't as dangerous? And I thought of one that will never be used in combat. The F-35. It's the most expensive weapons program in history, in any country. And it's a total dog. It will never be used. The F-35 will never kill anybody. Because there's better weapons for whatever function you have. We already have cheaper, better weapons for it. So yes, we've spent a couple $1 trillion on the F-35. Let's put another $1 trillion in and take away the ICBMs. on this thing. Well, that's, as I say, that's not entirely a joke, actually. But at Lockheed, they're Lockheed, whereas the ICBMs are Northrop Grumman. But Lockheed is a major subcontractor. So you keep the jobs. But the other way, of course, would be, do we have other needs for the jobs? Yes, of course, obviously. There are things that actually save people's lives instead of endanger them. And it would be very nice to be able to shift that. That's our job. Very hard. Will it happen? I said to these people, I said, look, what we want Biden and Putin to agree on is not just nuclear war must not be fought unless the other side is about to attack us, in which case we preempt. That's our current strategy. So instead, no ICBMs, no launch on warning, no preemption, no delusion of damage limiting. So I said, here's the real program. And then I had to say, fat chance. That puts the aerospace industry out of business. And Biden isn't about to do that. So there are other things in reducing the Cold War. Yes, the Cold War notion, treating them as if they were enemies like Hitler, with whom you cannot negotiate, cannot compromise, are threatened ourselves by him. This is delusional. It's as delusional to say that Putin and Xi threaten us in the way that, to the extent that Hitler did, you could say. That's as delusional as saying there's no climate problem, or that QAnon, or any of that stuff. It's delusional, but it's very profitable on this. So hard to change. But I was asked by someone just today, well, I'll even say, why not? I'll drop a name here. I was talking to Jerry Brown today, who I talk with a lot because he's the chairman of the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences. He's very, very good on these subjects. Works with William Perry a lot, former secretary. And he was saying, but they say, how can we collaborate with this murderer, Putin, and these Xi with his genocide of the Uyghurs and so forth, which we're hearing, all the time. How can we possibly collaborate with these people? He said, what's the answer to that? I said, here's the answer. We collaborated totally, in total alliance collaboration with Joseph Stalin, who was as tyrannical and ruthless as anybody in history has ever been. And we collaborated with him against a common enemy who was even more dangerous, and to good effect. And that was the right thing to do. We could do it. And to say, we have a common enemy right now. The nuclear policies of the nuclear states and the nuclear weapons, above all, US and Russia, also India and Pakistan, as Alan Roebuck, who I know is here on this audience, has made very clear. They won't lead to, they can lead to nuclear winter themselves, especially if we renew testing and they get H-bombs. But even without that, okay, that is a common enemy. We must have collaboration on climate, on pandemics, on nuclear weapons with Russia and China and India, who's under a massacring fascistic leader also. We don't have time for regime change in any of those countries in order to deal with our common problems. We have to collaborate with them. And can we? Again, I said, those problems, nuclear weapons and climate and pandemics, are far more dangerous to the United States of America and all of humanity than Hitler was, or the Japanese warlords were. What was the threat they made to the United States of America? Not comparable to the common threat we're facing now from worldwide policies that require cooperation. So in short, it's not impossible. We can and must learn to act toward common security, collaborative security, words that Gorbachev brought into the language and have fallen into disuse. A new way of thinking, common security. Don't try to increase our security by reducing the security of others. Don't base our policy and our security on threats to eliminate most of humanity, which is what we're doing, which is as insane as any of the insanities we see in the last year, especially, throughout this country. Trump is still president. Okay, we've seen the possibility of mass delusion. And I'll end by saying our nuclear policies have been based and reflect mass delusions as much as any in human history. And it's time for us to keep doing what we're doing, but also to become aware of the realities of the situation, as the ones that apt to lead to discouragement. And I'll mention, for example, become aware that there are people who profit by the status quo and are very effective in maintaining it. And those are names that you won't find in arms control books. Look in the index for the name Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. They're just not there, as though they weren't part of the problem. That's like trying to deal with climate without observing that there is a company called Exxon in the world. It's time for us to become aware who we are dealing with, confronting. And it's not to call them enemies that must be exterminated, but it is to recognize what our problem is and what the route would be to changing it. So I've heard a lot of that here already today. And what we need now is not just questions. How do we move these jobs and districts? But answers. That's where we need to turn our ingenuity. And I love this group and its lineage, and Robert Moore's leadership on this, and Ro Khanna's leadership. I'm honored to be on the same platform here with him, so to speak. And anyway, I appreciate the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Dan. Those were deeply insightful comments, and we very much appreciate them. We got about 6 minutes or so, I think, or 7, for a few questions, and I'm going to take the prerogative and privilege as the moderator tonight to ask the first one, or it's really a comment. And I made it when we were together for the Massachusetts Peace Action webinar in February as well, which is, I do think there is some wisdom in what the nuclear freeze campaign did when it couldn't achieve its entire goal of a freeze on the testing, production, and deployment of nuclear weapons. We never could get that passed. It was an advisory resolution in the House, but it never even came to a vote in the Senate. And so we said, well, why don't we try to at least get the first 1/3 of that, which was nuclear testing, which in some ways was the most dangerous aspect in terms of the escalation. And through executive leadership by Bill Clinton, some years later, we moved forward on that, and there still is a nuclear testing moratorium in effect today. So the parallel, I think, is very much what you touched on at the beginning of your remarks, Dan, which is that the land-based nuclear weapons, the ICBMs, are by far the most dangerous leg of the triad. I wish we could get rid of the triad immediately, if not sooner. But in reality, we're probably going to have to take it down in chunks. That's the most dangerous chunk. Professor Frank von Hippel has done some of the outstanding scholarly work on this, of why they're so dangerous. They're hair trigger weapons, and they're highly accurate. So they tend to make people think it's use them or lose them, and we can fight and win a nuclear war, that kind of thinking. And so they're also very, very expensive. And so if we could stop this nuclear modernization, and in fact, instead of modernizing the land-based ICBMs, move toward eliminating them, that would be true leadership by the United States. That, I think, would change the dynamic in the world and hopefully set us on a path toward globally abolishing all of the weapons for everyone. But let's start with the most dangerous ones. I think you had some real wisdom there, Dan.
Well, as maybe you know, Robert, I couldn't agree with you more. That is my highest priority and has been for a long time. And it, interestingly, when you mention Frank von Hippel, who was on this, I'm only seeing the top of his head now. I don't know where he is. Oh, there he is. Without, you know, I've forgotten the name of the energy secretary that he persuaded should continue the what Hazel O'Leary. Now it comes to me. Okay, look, I'm gonna take credit for something that I never have. Frank knows this. I don't think I ever did anything more effective in my life, including the Pentagon Papers, seriously, than the following. The last time and only time I've been in the Pentagon, in the Defense Secretary's office since 1967 was when I told the then secretary at that point, send Frank von Hippel over to Hazel O'Leary to educate. She was the head of energy. And that was critical. Frank was critical in getting that test moratorium continued. You say Clinton, but you know, Clinton, I think was relying a lot on Gore, and Gore and his assistant were not in favor of, they wanted to end the moratorium, start the testing. So anyway, people can have an effect. And Frank, of course, has had that effect on a number of occasions. So yes, that is, the testing was critical and is in some danger now, I would say, specifically. And on the ICBMs, absolutely. We all heard Ro Khanna say, can't we just extend the Minuteman? You know, he knows that the Minuteman is just as dangerous as the GBSD, is the new ICBM, and you need to get rid of it. But, you know, as you say, he's working with the realities here and trying to do it and trying to stop the GBSD, the ground-based strategic term, Northrop Grumman and Lockheed's addition to this. If he doesn't succeed in that, and frankly, the odds are very much against him. You know, is he going to succeed in getting rid of this dog? I mean, this dangerous thing? Probably not. But is it worth trying? Oh, absolutely. Because if it goes through, and there will still be a chance next year, you know, to cut it off, but every year, another 10 billion here, another 10 billion there, and eventually you've got a commitment. And the point with the GBSD, the ground-based thing, which Biden has put a lot of money into, you are committing yourself to keeping this going for till 2075. And here's the problem. If we're alive in 2075, it will be because the GBSD has not been used, or our current war plans have not been launched. And the existence of the ICBM makes that less likely. The existence of the ICBM makes it less likely we will be here in 2075. It is against our national security. And that's an argument which apparently, and I trust his judgment on this, because Ro Khanna knows that, he doesn't feel it's politic for him to make that argument right now. Why? Cost, you know, we've got cost on it, et cetera. Well, we can push him on that. Even Ro Khanna, give him some pressure on that one, and not whether he appreciates it or not. But I know, and on the Congress, and on Adam Smith is in favor of getting rid of ICBMs. He is the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. But as he told me, I don't have my committee with me on this. It's got about 59 members. And why not? Because their donations come from Lockheed and Raytheon, and the votes and the jobs and everything else. That's what we have to change. So as they used to say, in Congress, they may not see the light, but they'll feel the heat. And if we can put heat on these people, on those other 59 members, we, as you say, we may actually be able to at least stop the modernization and then move to get rid of the Minutemen.
Thanks again so much. And I'm afraid, sisters and brothers, that we're just about out of time, but let's show Dan again our appreciation for his great leadership over many decades now. And I do want to, as before I bid you goodbye, we are ending at 8:30. Nikki, could you put up the screen of some of our upcoming activities and just send you with that we have ongoing work, including some lobby trainings and lobby days already next week, starting next week. So we hope you'll go to our website and look at that. Our next annual Hiroshima Nagasaki commemoration, we've been doing one every year since 1980, will be on August 5th, and the keynote speaker will be Ambassador Thomas Graham, a longtime leader for the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. And then the annual Multi-Faith Service for Peace, also mark your calendar for November 14th to hear Sister Simone Campbell will be the preacher at the morning service. So thank you again for being with us. Stay tuned. We have a advocacy committee coming up just a week from tonight, so watch for that. Check our website. Thank you again, everyone. Special thanks to Dr. Dan Ellsberg. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening, and let's continue to work together for a world without nuclear weapons, a world of peace. Thanks again.